Good morning. How are you? Well, it's a beautiful day out, and wearing a bow tie because I'm being feted at home under isolation from my birthday. Um, I don't know. I think my view of life is pretty simple, uh, and as applied, maybe it gets more complex. But it's like life is like an opera. You can throw yourself into it and be a part of it, or you could sit up in the stands and watch other people take risks. And those people who are up in the stands are always enjoying your failures and defeats, but they miss the opportunity to be a part of the struggle. And the struggle matters. So I always tell friends that proof to me of a divinity is that for an alert mind, you can never be bored. Doesn't mean you can be happy, but it means you're not bored. And as a kid, I wanted to be a Renaissance man before I knew what the hell that meant. And over time, I discovered there's no possible way, given the accumulation of information, data, culture, music, you name it, that you can be a Renaissance man. But it means that as long as your noggin works, you just can't be bored. So I'm told that the name John means monk warrior. So it's sort of like you're meditating in the field of action. I kind of like that description. I mean, it sort of fits what I've done, not in the sense of being in regular combat, but in terms of the argument of ideas. I once had somebody during a Q&A phase say to me, you know, John, you live too much in your head. And I said, and exactly where do you live? We walk around in this thinking meat, and we are limited and facilitated by the fact that this machine that we move around in works. Joseph Campbell once said that how you think of yourself determines whether you're happy or unhappy. So he told everybody to look up at the light bulbs. And he said, if you think of the light bulbs as fragile and so forth like that, if that's how you identify yourself, then life can be a misery. But if you think of yourself and identify with the light, then life is a very different thing. Anyhow, sorry for wandering off. Let's see, what's on my mind? Well, CDC introduced confusion, I think in part because they're as eager as children in the backseat of a car to get there. And governments have a way, and I don't mean this in a terrible way, of thinking they know better than we do. And you just can't violate common sense. It's sort of like they gave a rule, but they ignored all the exceptions to the rule that apply, like people who lie about having been vaccinated. Another category is the January 6th Commission. I do not understand why we want to do that. It's just going to give us lies. It's going to be a delay. And I think the whole purpose of it is to expel political energy elsewhere rather than do anything about the criminals who actually perpetrated the attack on the Capitol. So it's a way to avoid action by key leaders, and leaders, not what you drink. I noticed when we were dealing with the special counsel report, I see members of the Congress, I see them in the green room, which is never green, before we go on the air, and they're all for Mueller's investigation. And I think they figured he was going to actually do something. And we didn't know that he was already agreeable to the dictates of a corrupt Justice Department not to do anything to trump his finances or his family. But they were very happy in that phase because it wasn't them doing it. It was someone else doing it. And then they could just say, let's see what he's done. They don't want to have the responsibility to do it themselves. If there's a weakness in our system when we want to have accountability, it is that we have leaders that would do anything to avoid actually making a decision. It's pretty interesting. Now, another one of these things that is fascinating to me is the question of what used to be called in the 1800s internal improvements, what we call, infrastructure now. And no less than the Jeffersonian Democrats were against internal improvements. That is, they were against improving the roads and so forth. And I'm talking about Madison and Monroe, and years later it was Jackson. And they thought, Madison and Monroe in particular, thought there had to be a constitutional amendment because to give money to the states to build roads internally, they thought violated the Constitution. But the argument always became afterwards in modern times that these internal improvements favor the nation if you can get around. And so that's where we are in the debate today, except now our fight is who's going to pay for it. And we can't have the wealthy Wall Street people compromised by a single centime anything they get for the bullshit that they do to this nation, further limiting the productivity of the return on the productivity of working men and women in America. They take the profit to themselves and don't share it. So we have selfishness in every direction, and that's got to change if this nation is going to persist. You know, a couple of people wrote me and said they wanted to hear more about my Bible thinking. Now, you got to remember, I'm a fallen Catholic in the sense that I have no use for the organization, for all of its scandals and everything else. And I understand people's faith and how it helps them. But I can't ignore my own reason. And there are a number of principles that I can't agree with. And no more would I, if I were a Republican, be faithful to that organization for its corruption than I would be to the Catholic Church that doesn't do enough about its own corruption. You know, my rule of thumb is look to the Sermon on the Mount. If you do that, whether there's a God or not, you're doing the right thing. You're taking care of the people who can't take care of themselves. You're showing empathy. You're showing at least some sort of patience rather than seeking conflict all the time. But that's not what happens. What happens is these churches are used as a stick to punish people that disagree with them. Well, we don't need that. And I don't know enough about the situation in the Middle East as much as I've studied it since I was a kid. But this is what religions do. They tear apart the world. You know, with my Celtic genetic background, I'm aware of why Henry VIII, who wanted to marry a woman that the church wouldn't allow him to marry, created his own church, the Anglicans. And then the Anglicans fight with the Roman Catholics, and it becomes a war really, between the island of Britain and the island of Ireland. So, okay, so that's my rant for the day. I think that if you think with charity toward others and you act upon it, that's all you have to do in this world. That's all you have to do. And there is no person who can't be that person. It's not a question of education. It's not a question of socioeconomic status. You see a person on the street who falls and your urge is to pick them up, you already have that kind of empathy. But when you see the Republican leadership, and yes, it is about politics because it is about where our country is, will they pick up someone? I don't think so. You know, you should know better than to trip. You should be healthier. You should be this, that, and the other thing. They don't seem to have any use for people. And politics is about people. Democracy is talking about individual votes of people. Our Constitution is talking about, you know, the general welfare. And the general welfare doesn't exist in the current Republican Party. There have been times when it did. And so I think you become a useful member of society when you care. And you become a useful member of society when you act upon what you care about. So, I excuse my meandering, but, you know, I get an opportunity because this is my birthday to maybe make less sense than usual if I do normally. So have a good day. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.